Okay. Well, enough of the chit chat. Let's get to the serious business. On today's questions for Pastor, we have a question that it says it's from Caleb. There's no last name, so Caleb, if you're out there, we got your question. It's written down. And the question, Pastor, is how do you know if God picks you to be a pastor? I guess it's a question of calling. How can you know if you're called to be a pastor?
Well, I would say there's probably three sides to that. You have desire, you have ability, and you have opportunity. And, the first one with desires, the Apostle Paul said that whoever desires the office of a bishop desires a good work, which is the office of a pastor. We use the word pastor, which means shepherd. And so there has to be a certain want to. Many pastors will tell you, when you're called to preach, that it's not necessarily their first choice. But I know that, my pastor, always says that that if you're called to preach, you won't be happy doing anything else. And so, when you think about, there's a lot of things that, and I say this a lot, all I ever wanted to be for when I was a kid was a firefighter. But, there was also this desire to preach. I enjoyed it. And then there's opportunity, which is the next step of it, is that people were always asking me to preach. I never asked someone if I could preach. Someone approached me at 14 years old and asked me to preach. And I really enjoyed it. And I loved studying the message. And it was something so exciting watching a sermon form and take shape, and then to be able to preach. And so there's this part of it is desire, and that's you'll have a desire to preach. But another part of that is the opportunity. Either opportunity will find you, or you'll find opportunity. If you're called to preach, you're going to want to preach. You're going to look for opportunities to preach, or opportunities to preach are going to look for you. And so there's desire and opportunity, but there's also, like I said, there's ability. And when I say ability, I'm not talking about human ability. And many times, when you think about guys that try to get into the ministry, sometimes it's built around people who have a natural charisma.
Yeah.
And people just like this person, and people are drawn for this person. And many times those types of guys either turn out to be heretics, or they end up washing out of the ministry. And they seem to have this natural ability, and they seem to even have a desire, but it's just not in the cards, so to speak. And so it's something else. It's the ability to stand up and to preach, and for people to receive the message of the word. And it's really something that goes beyond you. It doesn't have anything to do, when I say ability, it doesn't have anything to do with really your own personal talent. It's like this supernatural thing that goes with where when you preach, God speaks to people. And you can't learn that really. When you go to Bible college, there's a lot of preaching classes, and they try to teach you how to preach, and they can teach you a lot of good rules, but I think that's really a mistake in a lot of ways. There's just this, it's not a natural ability, it is a supernatural ability. And so you have, number one, you're going to have a desire to preach if you're called to preach. Number two, you're going to be given opportunity to do so. And number three, you're going to be given this kind of supernatural ability. People used to tell me all the time that they could not believe when I preach. Now I'm a pastor and you expect me to be able to preach. But, when I was 14 and I would get up and preach a sermon on Sunday morning, go to church camp, it would blow people's minds. They'd come up to me, and not bragging on myself. They would say, "Man, how do you learn to do that? Where did you get that?" And I didn't get that. It's not a natural ability that I have. It's something that God just gave me, and it's one of the reasons I knew I was called. So, ability, desire, and opportunity.
All right.
Yeah.
Ability, desire, and opportunity. Now, to shift the question a little bit, do you think that goes beyond just a calling to pastor, but that goes into any calling?
Sure, yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways when we think about pastoring or ministry, the Bible says that we're all called to do ministry, you know, and so in one way or another, you're all called to preach. We're all called to preach, really, and so, but certainly, yeah, I think that in life you have things God has set you aside to do, not just ministry. And I think it's the same thing: desire, opportunity, and ability. And I don't necessarily think that means your calling and your vocation don't have to be the same thing.
Right.
And I think a lot of people try to make that mistake is they try to think that, well, my job is my calling, and they wrap their identity up inside of their job, and they're so worried about their job. Mm-hmm. Well, I worked for years and years, my whole adult life, as working a job so that I could preach, and preaching was not my job.
My understanding is a majority of pastors are bivocational. They work another job.
Yeah, the vast majority of pastors are not full-time pastors. And so don't make the mistake of thinking that your profession is your calling. Your profession is just what you do to make money, and that could be anything as long as it's not sinful. Your calling can be something else, and everyone needs to search that out.
So you need to be paying special attention to your own desires and opportunities and abilities.
Absolutely.
So that you can see what your calling might be. It may not be to pastor, but maybe it's to worship or to pray or to serve.
Great example I think of is, our mutual friend from Hollis, Brother Robert Williams. Him and his family have been going on mission trips for years. That has nothing to do with his vocation. That's something that he chooses to do. He almost does it. I think my understanding is he does it during his vacation time. What you would do on vacation, instead of going on vacation, he goes into the foreign mission field. And so that's another great example that your calling and your vocation are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so.
All right. Well, that's awesome. That's great. I hope that gives you all kind of something to think about, to look into in your own life. Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And we'll see you on the next one.